Busy schedule for this extraordinary meeting. We've got some serious business to take care of today, so let's get started. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, the minutes from the last meeting stand as approved. The next item, or the first order of business, is on the scheduling of examinations policy. I had this distributed and asked anybody who had any concerns about it to please talk to me about it. And nobody did so. I would like to try to deal with these first two motions expeditiously so that we can get to the responsible employee motion. I will read it into the minutes. Section 1, whereas there is some confusion among faculty and students regarding the scheduling of midterm examinations outside of normally scheduled class time, and whereas some students have been unable to attend their regularly scheduled classes or other midterms because of midterm exams that are scheduled outside of normally scheduled class time. And 1.3, whereas there is currently no policy in place to prevent such conflicts from occurring. And 1.4, whereas the Undergraduate Council has developed the following policy to regulate the administration of midterm exams that are scheduled outside of normally scheduled class times. Section 2, therefore be it moved, the University Senate approves the attached policy on exams outside of normal times. And if I can paraphrase this really quickly, it basically extends the process for resolving conflicts that is applied to final examinations to midterms. And then also it requires professors that are planning on scheduling exams outside of normal class time to notify the students in their syllabus so the student can be aware of it going into the class. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All in favor, please indicate with a voice vote of aye. Aye. All against? The motion passes unanimously. Second item of business is the Major Minor Certificate Program Course Overlap Policy. Section 1, 1.1, whereas the university has no clear policies in place to regulate the application of courses to more than one program to guide the efforts of faculty as they develop programs and courses or to guide students as they plan their course of study. And 1.2, whereas student demand for cross-disciplinary combinations of majors and minors is increasing. And 1.3, whereas the Undergraduate Council has developed the following policy to regulate the application of courses to more than one program. 2.2, therefore be it moved, the University Senate approves the attached Major Minor Certificate Program Course Overlap Policy. This basically encodes what we've been doing already, which says that the academic unit can determine whether course overlaps are allowable for their program. Are there any, I forgot to have this moved, didn't I? Who moves this? Move it. Okay, it's moved. Thank you. It doesn't require a second since it comes from committee. Is there any discussion on this motion? Yes. Just to point out there's a typo. Okay. Bettina, fix that typo. No, further down. No. Oh, you had to get it into here. Students. 1.1. Yeah, I think that may actually be the case. Yeah, typos we can fix without running that through. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All against say nay. Now, moving on to the responsible employee policy, I do want to say I've done my best through this process to act as a neutral arbiter. And I know sometimes I have failed in that aspiration. I will do my best again to do so at this meeting. I must have succeeded to some extent because both sides seem to be angry at me. So let's keep going with this. we will take up where we left off with consideration of the main motion. The chair recognizes Vice President Harbaugh.
So I'd like to...
Please wait until you get the mic.
So I'd like to propose an amendment, which Bettina will put up on screen shortly. This has been on the Senate webpage for the past day or so. There's one small typo that I hope is fixed in the version that she's putting up now, but it's not a substantive change at all, just in one of the whereases. This amendment comes from Carol Stabile, the chair of the co-chair of the GSBV. Parts of it were written by myself. Parts of it were written by people in the general counsel's office. I think that in general, this makes changes to the policy that we were debating at the last meeting that clarify some issues, that include some things that people wanted changed. In general, I think that I urge people to vote in favor of this amendment, even if they're opposed to the policy itself, because I think that by approving this amendment, we'll have a cleaner starting place for the debate that we're now going to have on the substantive issues revolving around mandatory reporting.
President Harbaugh, could you please highlight the main features of these amendments?
Yeah, so the main change, one major change is in the whereases. The original version included some language asserting that it was, that it had been demonstrated that mandatory reporting would do things to reduce sexual assaults and so forth. I think that that is not essential to the amendment and is controversial, so I thought it was cleaner to take that out. That was one of the things that I changed. I changed the title of it. I think it was something like responsible employee, this, that, and the other. This, I think, is a more accurate descriptive title, responsible employee reporting of prohibited discrimination, harassment, and sexual assault. That's really what the policy covers. Bettina, if you page down a little bit. Keep going. Okay, I added some links. The original policy did not include links to some previous policy that I thought was relevant because we should know what we're changing. The policy statement here, the green language there is essentially just added in a different format. Bettina, if you shrink that a little bit, I think people can see the changes on that will be on the right-hand side. Yeah. So you can see what has been deleted on the right-hand side there. Somebody asked the question of whether this covered religion. It does, as you can see. Okay, keep going down. This part has been added, I think, by Missy, as defined in state and federal law. I don't think that's controversial. That's giving a definition. There are no changes there. Okay, so this is adding causing or attempting to cause instead of just saying sexual or physical abuse itself. Placing another in fear. That is now considered dating violence, so this all comes under the definition of dating violence. Okay, so now under the question of credible evidence, this came up during the last meeting, whether union stewards would be exempt. This makes clear that union stewards and union representatives, that any discussions they have are not considered credible evidence and therefore don't need to be disclosed. I think we actually approved most of this language last time, but this cleans up a little bit, so you might want to carefully look at that and make sure that you're okay with it. adds licensed mental health professionals. I'm not sure that was in the original. And then if you go down to K, so page down a little more, campus community member, this is a new change, and some people might think this is significant. Here it's a little bit more specific about what a campus community member is, okay? And then, keep going. When we get to the substance, you'll see why that matters. Okay, so if you go up to, right there. So this has been added, harassment or sexual harassment involving an employee, student, or campus community member. So now this has been added. But the rest of that language is the same. This bit right below B, employees should be aware that AAO is tasked with ensuring compliance with this policy and state and federal law. So this was added I think at my request, to clarify that the AAO office is not necessarily going to work in the best interests of the people who are reporting an incident, but instead is looking out for to make sure that the university is complying with law and looking out for the university's interests. So it ends, I think it's pretty clear, AAO employees are not advocates for individuals. So this is really, I think clarifying language that is that recognizes that by defining everyone, or essentially everyone, as a responsible employee, as a mandatory reporter, that this that the university needs to provide other ways for employees who are concerned about an incident involving sexual harassment or something, other ways for them to talk things over. And this is the clause that sort of explains that. That's fairly self-explanatory. Adds the fact that you can report to law enforcement, of course. So this now is new under corrective action. This is a new clause, was added by the General Counsel's Office. Campus community members who violate this policy may be trespassed from campus, which I assume means banned from campus, and may otherwise lose their right to use university property and or participate in university-sponsored programs and activities. Now, it might have been nice to see some explanation of how someone is trespassed from campus, what the process is, who's involved in that process. We might, I assume that the university has a standard process for doing that, but I don't know the details. I would say that's a substantive change here. And other than that, that's it.
Thank you, Vice President Harbaugh. The chair will now entertain discussion on the amendment and the amendment only. Please do not
I think we need a second.
Oh, is there a second? Second from Senator McGee. Please do not digress into substantive discussion of the main motion, but rather only the amendments as proposed. The chair will now recognize discussion on the amendment. Seeing none, we'll try it with a voice vote first. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. All against, nay. The amendment passes. We now move to discussion of the motion. As per Robert's Rules of Order and my attempt to do so last week, I will try to alternate between for and against the motion. If you deem yours to be neutral or informational, feel free to chime in at either place. Please make a good faith effort to go do that correctly. I'm going to try to keep tally of where we left off here. Let's start with 4. Actually, heads is for, tails is against. Tails, let's start with against. Can't say that ain't fair. Any discussion against the main motion? Or informational in nature? Senator Copeman.
Thank you. I'd like to begin the discussion by making a motion to amend. I'm sorry, Bettina, I tried to email this to you, but I can't connect to the internet right now. So if you could go to the bottom of the policy that's being proposed. All the way down. So my motion will be to add a new section titled Section 13, Sunset. I'm going to make this motion. Do you need me to make the text of the motion first and then speak to it? Or should I speak to?
Why don't you go? Yeah, we need to read the text of the motion into the record.
So the text will be, in light of the University Senate's recognition of the complexities of this policy and the need to further address numerous outstanding concerns regarding various aspects of the policy, this policy will expire on December 15, 2016, unless first renewed by the Senate prior to that date. First renewed by the Senate.
I know this is a very tense time to do this, but I've got to do it. Bettina has been doing a great job of taking dictation from the floor, which is a very tough thing to do. Can we all give it up for Bettina? And that was pretty fast. That was good. I only missed one word. A short one. Is there a second? Second from Senator Teague. And I'm sorry, I tend to recognize, my vision isn't that good. I tend to see the folks in front first. But discussion on the amendment.
Did I introduce it?
Oh, yes. Beginning with you, Senator Copeman.
So I've heard from numerous people on this floor, numerous senators who could not be here today, numerous constituencies who will be directly affected by these policies. And many of these persons have grave concerns about some of the implications of this policy. Many of them have grave concerns about some of the express requirements of the policy. Without going into my own position on the policy at this point, I think it's very clear that there are a number of outstanding issues that are not going to be addressed by the end of this quarter that are not going to be addressed on this floor today or even next week if we were to extend till next week. In light of that, and I think some people in the context of debate on this motion to amend might be willing to further speak to some of those complexities, but in light of them, I think the Senate needs to find a way to allow ourselves to take whatever action on the entire motion we want to take, but whatever that action is, to ensure that we come back and actually give this motion and these policies the utmost care that they deserve next academic year, after the expiration of the emergency policy in the summer, and when we'll all be back. Just for one example of the complexities of this policy, I have a very quick handout that I'd like to pass out somewhat awkwardly here, juggling between two hands. Apologies for this, but I'm a very visual thinker, and it didn't really come into view to me. It didn't really come into view for me how complex this policy is until somebody sort of helped me visualize it along these lines. So this policy is really four policies, and I both understand and believe I agree with the desire for a streamlined omnibus policy so that everything is in one place, so that employees, faculty, students can find everything in just one place and not have to sift between multiple different policies in multiple different places. That said, I'm concerned that the omnibus nature of this policy hasn't sufficiently addressed both aspects of the policy that have been front and center in Senate discussions, but also aspects of the policy that haven't been front and center in Senate discussions. And this is just one example of the complexities that are at work in this policy and why it needs greater attention. We've pretty much focused our discussions on Box A in light of events at the university over the past few years. To me, that makes a great deal of sense. But there are also three other things at least going on in this policy. There's employee-employee relations with respect to information received on sexual violence and sexual harassment, and there are also a host of requirements, including required reporting requirements for other forms of prohibited discrimination. We haven't had much of an opportunity to discuss especially those latter sets of reporting requirements regarding other forms of prohibited discrimination. I think to have a full discussion of that, we need to involve the multiple constituencies, the multiple protected classes that we just saw up in green on the top of the policy a few minutes ago. Students of color, faculty of color, various other constituencies need to be consulted. And I don't think we can do this today or in 7 days. So I'm hoping that this sunset is our way of making sure that whatever happens at the end of today, the Senate comes back and revisits this policy and gets this stuff right, or at least righter. That's my rationale for making this motion.
Thank you, Senator Copeman. Further discussion on the motion? On the amendment. We'll start off, since Senator Copeland was for, any discussion against or informational in nature or neutral. Senator Espinoza.
Could you please give us an idea of how you think this process might go forward then, this discussion process, Colin? Who would be involved in it? I mean, just how do you envision this moving forward if this were to pass?
I could see this taking place either by referring the motion to committee or committees, referring parts of the motion back to the CSBGB, but also, especially with respect to these bottom two boxes, referring those aspects of the motion to a committee appropriate to address those aspects of the motion. That would be one option. Another option would be for a variety of people to work on it over summer, bring it to Senate floor day one of fall term. I don't have a particular course to recommend there, but I think both of those would work well.
Further discussion on the amendment? Senator McIntyre.
This is a point of information. I would love to hear from the committee about the processes, and I'm not privy to all of them, I'm not on the committee, but the processes and the consultation work that's already been done. It strikes me as, on the one hand, a very thoughtful, lengthy process that the committee has engaged in putting forward this policy, but yet potentially there's some unanswered questions. I feel as a senator, we need to potentially do a little bit more communication and support of our committees who are charged to do this work. And so I guess I'd like to hear from the committee chair or committee members on their consultation and their work with stakeholders that are represented in these boxes or on the previous slide. Because my sense is there was a lot done there, but I don't know that for sure, and I'd like to hear a bit more about that.
Thank you, Senator McIntyre. Is there anyone that would like to respond to Senator McIntyre's inquiry? Ms. Metella.
So I'm sure there are others that can speak to this as well, but we had 4 or 5 committee meetings where we talked about the policy language. The policy language was presented. The committee itself has representatives from the different employee groups, OAs, senators. There's an SEIU representative, I believe, graduate students. Professor Fry is on the committee. Professor Stabile is on the committee. And there was a deliberative process about all of the portions that were in the policy. And I believe that was actually after a recommendation came from another task force to take this policy and give it to the committee. So I think there's also deliberations in the previous task force that were part of this. So, I think there have been various committees and task force and meetings that have discussed these issues. And I also think maybe it's important to note that while our old policy is extremely confusing, the old policy in place covers all 4 boxes that are up there. So while it's important to debate and understand what policies we have on the book, the responsible employee policy in play does not differ in terms of the scope of coverage that was already in place by the previous U of O policy.
Thank you, Ms. Metella. Senator Marjoram.
Yeah, in terms of this amendment, I appreciate the spirit of it. This is a very complicated set of policies we're trying to deal with. My worry is about both the date and the sunset. This has taken a long time to get this proposal forward, and asking people to work on it over the summer, a committee that's been working for a very long time, even if they were going to convene in the fall, the chances of them getting something by December 15th, I think, would be pretty hard to do. I would rather that if there is additional work taking place, that they have adequate time to do all that consultation, to get all that input and feedback, and not be running up against another deadline in which it's going to be rushed to push forward. So I guess I would not support this amendment for the sunset.
Would you wish to propose an amendment to the amendment to extend the time?
I would rather we have opportunity to amend this at any time. I'd rather just see it established as policy, and then when the committee does its work to amend this and do additional changes, that we see those changes come to the Senate.
That is true. The Senate has the authority to revisit this and amend this policy, even if it's passed. Other discussion on the amendment? We're going to count that as an against. Anybody for it? There's a student back there, and please introduce yourself.
I'm Dana Runway. I'm part of the caucus in the GTFF that's been working on this. And I just want to push back slightly against the presumption that these individual members of the committee stand in for all GTFs. So, for example, the one GTF on the committee standing in for everyone. I don't even remember who it is that was the GTF person. And we didn't have any forums where we had any conversations as employees or as students. To my knowledge, there have been no public forums for students and survivors to really talk about this, besides something like Take Back the Night that is very clearly against ideas like required reporting. So we made some suggestions in a letter that we made public as our caucus that offered all kinds of provisions and methodology to include and to privilege the voices of survivors, to privilege the voices of folks who really research on this. And we're really concerned about the way that the voting even happened on the committee. It was, to my understanding, a 7-16 vote. 7 people total voted out of a committee of 16, and one of those 7 abstained. Many of the people who would have voted no didn't even have a chance to reply because it was an email vote and folks were out of town. And so I think that people should just be deeply suspicious of this and take the sunset policy under deep consideration and not just take the committee's word for it that these voices were solicited, because I don't think that they meaningfully were.
Thank you. Any neutral comments or comments against the amendment? Any further comments for the amendment? Senator Dreiling.
Yeah, I have both a comment and a question. I'd like to begin with the question. If I could ask Missy from General Counsel's office to address this. And she addressed the question, I think, that may be on a lot of our minds, which is the extent to which existing policy at the University of Oregon, relies on mandatory reporting, and has for how long. I'd like to know how long that has been the case. And the extent to which these 4 boxes, in a sense, are also covered by that existing policy, which is, as I understand, part of these OARs that were repealed. So, and I've looked through these, and I think it's important to have that historical context with respect to this policy, because I think what we're facing here is the first opportunity to scrutinize a policy that has been in place, to my knowledge, for many years, and has mostly kind of operated in a way that I think has remained invisible to most employees, most students, faculty. And for the first time, I think we're actually having a vetting of the policy status quo at the University of Oregon with respect to required reporting, and an opportunity from that has come for a critique of required reporting. And so we're hearing this process in a way that I think is meaningful, given the history of what spawned this initiative, first of all, in the Senate, which was to basically develop and tighten up. This was following the alleged basketball rape cases 2 years ago, and the Senate was very concerned about this. This is what the task force was set up for. And so this window is only 2 years old. I mean, you put this into a historical time span, this is not much. This committee started work, to my knowledge, about a year ago on this policy itself. And so this is the first chance we've had for a vetting. And so I wanted to make sure that while we're doing this vetting, we know where it's coming from. It's not coming out of the blue. I think there's a history we need to know about here. And so could you address that for me?
Ms. Metella, would you like to respond?
Sure. So I don't actually know the legislative history totally off the top of my head, but I'll tell you what I know. There may be some gaps, and if there are big gaps, then I can definitely look them up, maybe have Chuck look them up while we're talking. So this policy, I believe, has been on the books either as an OAR or a UOL policy in some form since, I think, 2004. And it's been advertised, so it's been on the books. I'm not gonna lie, it's very confusing. And so one part of the task force recommendation about looking at these policies was to point out, nobody understands what your responsible employee policy says. So, hey, committee and university, you need to make it clear to students who's a responsible employee, which means who's gonna do something if you report prohibited discrimination or sexual harassment, and who is not gonna do anything. Who, when you report to that professor, is going to not report and not connect with services and not, as a university, take action? And that's unclear right now, based on our policy and, frankly, based on the conversations that we're having to date. So that was a big part of putting together a brand new policy, was hopefully, and I can't say that we accomplished this task, but putting together a policy that is clear. Who is a responsible employee? Who is not a responsible employee? What does that mean? Who are our confidential resources? We wanted to make sure that that was really, really clear. But those concepts existed before, since 2004. I think our previous policy said something like, very similar to what we have to date, which is, here's a definition of prohibited discrimination. It's very broad. It picks up Title VII, Title VI, Title IX, so all of the sort of prohibited discrimination bases. If you have credible evidence of prohibited discrimination, you need to report it, and it says to your supervisor or to AAEO. We have updated that through emergency revisions and other revisions so that we can also report to the Title IX coordinator when appropriate, or through the Office of Crisis Intervention. There have been education efforts surrounding this policy. So there's a mandatory sexual harassment training that I believe all employees have done, and that policy, that training actually walks through these reporting requirements. There's an annual notification that goes out from the president every year that talks about reporting obligations. And for our freshman students, especially those in the higher risk categories in residence dorms, there is a lot of training and efforts to talk about who is a responsible employee, what that means, where are your confidential resources. So I totally agree. I think there is an opportunity right now to look at this policy, but this policy, or at least the ideas behind this policy, have been on the books for some time, and we as a university have been talking about it in some form for a while as well. I think that answers a lot of the questions, but I'm definitely willing to answer more.
Thank you. We had a 4. Let's have people who would like to speak against the policy or neutral. I'm going to count that as a neutral. The amendment. Thank you. Senator Lesby, and then Senator Pride on the next against. Oh, it's a neutral? I'll get you next. Okay, I'll get you next then.
Yeah, I'm actually just responding to that comment. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I am employed as an RA, as is Senator Dunn in front of me, and both of us can attest to the fact that we are not very well trained in understanding our responsibilities as mandatory reporters in almost like any way. We are given perhaps 20 to 30 minutes discussing what that means, and I feel confident in saying that most employees in residence housing have no idea what their direct responsibilities are. So that's something to consider when you're looking at this. I'm in support of the amendment, but I just wanted to clarify that detail, that most employees in residence housing really aren't sure and struggle to realize that, both with issues of sexual violence occurring with their residents as well as folks outside of the residence halls.
Senator Fried.
Just a point of information. So it is certainly the case that it's been terribly confusing and inconsistent, and it's my impression that some of the messages that were sent out in 2014 about what our policy was were not consistent with the OARs that were on the books, but people generally didn't know. Part of the problem was that this was very deep inside the grievance procedures, but the OAR that was on the books as recently as a year ago did have an informal complaint and resolution process that did stipulate that individuals seeking informal resolution of a problem of alleged prohibited discrimination or sexual harassment, or who merely wish to discuss their experience with an officer of the university, may request anonymity. So I do think that although there are ways in which it's carried over, there's also been many substantial changes as well to sort of core substantive issues.
Do you have an opinion on the amendment?
No.
Okay, thank you. Other discussion of the amendment? We've had a couple of neutrals, and I forgot where we are, but I think we can just, anyone who wants to speak? I was about to say Senator Psaki. I think we'll go with Senator Bryant.
I'm speaking for the amendment because I think it's pretty clear that there's disagreement here and that there's a need for integration and better work and, higher. It's not that the committee didn't do work. I think everyone appreciates what it's like to create a document over a year's time. But that doesn't mean that it's finished, and in some way we have to recognize that in this overall motion. And if this idea of the sunset clause is to actually sort of just say, yeah, we know we're not done yet, and because otherwise, in a sense, there's no record of it besides people who might want to read the minutes of these meetings. And so I kind of would like in policy somewhere something that says, this is the best we could do so far, and something kind of operational about that, not just a witnessing of that, but something that says, and we're going to look at it again, and it's going to be on this date. We can renew it on that date. But if you say nothing, if you don't make this amendment, then, how does anyone know that we think that this is improvable? That's all.
Thank you, Senator Bryant. Senator Frazee.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to vote against this amendment because I think it will probably come as to no surprise from my colleagues in the room over the last few meetings, maybe over many meetings over the year. I'm a bit exasperated sometimes at the pace that we move as a body. And this seems to only delay, again, a policy decision. And I feel like we need to make a decision. It also comes to me as a bit superfluous in that we can go back to this amendment at any time and do exactly what would happen prior to December 15th at any time. The third point, I think, the reason I'm voting against this amendment is that this committee, though the policy may be decided on or not, the committee is not going to disband. I suspect that the Committee on Sexual and Gender-Based Violence is going to have a lot of work that remains. And this conversation will inform that work. I don't know that us forcing, again, this conversation or delaying it would move them any faster towards resolution of this policy. I think it will. They will discuss it anyway, and we can bring this up at any time. I don't think that the sunset clause is necessary.
Senator Dunn.
I'm in favor of the amendment because of the fact that once a policy is passed and institutionalized, yes, we have the power and the ability to come back to this policy and amend it further. But it seems once this policy decision is made, then the decision, like when it comes to the community's perception of it, this decision becomes final and made. And I think that this clause reminds folks within the body of the Senate that there are improvements in conversations that need to continue. And I would be wary of not including this amendment because of the fact that there are significant improvements that can be made to this policy.
We are a couple of minutes away from the allotted agenda time for this. Are we ready to call the question on this amendment? Seeing that, we better have a careful count on this. All in favor, and Kirk, can you help me with the count? All in favor, please raise your placards and keep them raised. For the sunset amendment, yes. Okay, 27-4. All against, please raise your placards and hold them high. Ten against. The amendment passes. Are we ready to move to call the question on the main motion with the incorporation of the amendment? No. Okay. So we are now. So at this point, we will either call the question or entertain a motion to extend discussion. Senator Dunn has a motion to extend discussion with a second from Senator Teague. This requires a 2/3 majority. Well, did I get it wrong? Oh, how long? Yeah, how long are you doing it for? 20 minutes. That would bring us to 4:40. Yes.
The timeline specified on the Senate agenda starts at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, sorry, this was all put together last minute.
No, I totally get it.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we've got another 30 minutes. Oh, thank you. Thanks for calling that. I was going by the written times here. I thought that was awfully quick. We will be able to go until 4:50. So continuing discussion. Thank you, Senator Dunn, but it's not unnecessary. Thank you for catching me on that, Senator Price. This is why we pay you the big bucks. What?
Numbers, you know.
Numbers. It's a numbers thing, yeah. So let's continue discussion of the main motion. Did we ever have against and against? Well, Senator Fried. Oh, please wait for the mic. Senator Mitchell, I see you.
So I want to do two separate things. I've been asked to read a letter, and I talked to Randy about that, and he asked me to not try to read the whole letter in the interest of time, so I will read a few paragraphs from this letter to be respectful of the requester. The requester's name is Laura Hansen. She graduated from the University of Oregon, I believe, a year ago in the Honors College. And she did send a letter to the Senate. It is posted on the blog, so the full letter is there. But she wanted this read to the Senate. So I will read and then tell you when I'm skipping parts. Dear University of Oregon Senators, I apologize for not being able to give my testimony in person. I work in politics in Portland, and I'm very busy at work after yesterday's election. I'm writing to you regarding the responsible employee policy proposal currently under your consideration. In January 2013, I was roofied and raped by the president of Chi Psi at the University of Oregon. You should already be familiar with how poorly the UO handled my rape report, given that the decisions you're making will directly affect my fellow survivors. If you're not familiar with my story, Camelia Mordison of Eugene Weekly did an excellent and thorough job telling my story and explaining how the UO failed me. You should read it before you vote today. And then it says copies are available to hand out. I don't know anything about that. That article only tells my story up to the meeting I had with Penny Dougherty and Robin Holmes in 2015. I requested a meeting with them after my legal claims against the university were settled because I wanted to provide my feedback about how they handled my case and how mandatory reporting and then a blatant disregard for that report was more damaging than the rape itself. But in that meeting, Ms. Dougherty and Ms. Holmes told me that they couldn't discuss the particulars of my case because they weren't familiar with it. After an article came out in the Huffington Post a few weeks ago describing the strides Oregon State University has made in their policies around rape and sexual assault on their campus, while the UO has failed, OSU has partnered with their most public survivor, Brenda Tracy, to not only move forward as a community, but to create policies that empower survivors. I was quoted in the article, quote, any efforts that I've made to connect with UO have been completely ignored or shut down. It looks small to an outsider, probably, but that kind of connection is important. It shows other survivors that they still have a place at the school. I'm now going to skip a section when she describes a recent experience of trying to connect and it not working out very well. Before that meeting, referring to the recent experience, she goes on, I believe that mandatory reporting policies took away students' autonomy and only exacerbated survivors' feelings of uncertainty, isolation, and betrayal, especially because as a victim of mandatory reporting, Now that I know the UO seems to have no memory of what they did to me, I believe that this proposal is downright dangerous. From my perspective, the UO shouldn't be making these huge policy changes and statements without having a system in place to thoughtfully and effectively resolve the rape complaints received. Another skip, and then to conclude, from the outside looking in, these factors combined with a mandatory reporting policy position survivors for an experience just like mine. Grief Life shunning the survivor because of the damage the rape story could do to the reputation of Grief Life, the university taking the complaint, dragging the survivor through an investigation, and then no matter the evidence gathered, letting the rapist stay on campus. My rapist admitted to what he did in January 2014, and he was allowed to remain on campus. In my experience, survivors just want to feel protected after their rape. With policies that take away the survivor's power to make decisions about what happens to them and to their stories, it seems clear that they would feel greater protection and security by keeping the experience to themselves. I am a public survivor because of the UO's mandatory reporting policy made me one. Survivors should be empowered and supported by the university community, not have their agency taken from them by the very community they trust. Laura Hansen. So that was the first thing. The second thing is I just want to speak as myself to this body. You've heard from me quite a bit in emails and at the last meeting. The thing I want to talk about that I have not talked as much about but is really pressing on my mind has to do with the impact of this policy on me as an educator. And even with this sunset clause, I am very aware that fall term, I and many people on this campus will be teaching courses that may be very impacted by this policy. And here's how it works. Actually, let me go back 2 years and say when then President Gottfredson sent out various mandates regarding reporting, required reporting, there started to be a lot of discussion about what it really meant and a lot of confusion. And I started to receive emails from people around campus who were teachers saying, help, I don't understand. And one kind of email I got actually was from people teaching writing. You might think that this stuff is really only relevant if you're teaching courses on racial discrimination and sexual violence, but the emails I got first were from people teaching writing who were telling me, what do I do? Because when I teach composition or nonfiction writing, I often get essays from students in which they describe experiences that fall into these categories they've not reported. Should I tell them they can't write about that? Should I report them? How does it bear on that? I didn't have any very good answers, and we kept referring them around. But the question's really, really important because it goes right to the heart of what we do as educators. If we tell a student, say in a memoir class, the best writing you're going to do is when you write from the heart. What is it that you really need to tell the world? That's the best writing you're going to do. But some of you, due to the bad things that have happened to you, are not allowed to do that unless you give up a certain choice. You can write, but we will have to report it. Or you can keep quiet, and you can't do the assignment from the heart. To me, and to many writing instructors, that goes right to the heart of education. Now let me talk about what happens in my classroom. I teach the psychology of trauma. Frankly, I don't want to hear people's trauma stories. I'm inundated with them. But I'm not going to stand there and tell my students, not with a clean conscience, you're not allowed to tell me what it is you want to tell me when it's part of what you think you need to do to learn. Because students often think that. They think, correctly or incorrectly, and I'm not there to judge them, that they need to talk about their experience in this world as it pertains to the readings they're doing in order to learn. I get that. It's a really hard thing when what they want to talk about is a rape they've never reported. I can't see any way to look at it that their academic freedom is not encroached on if I say to them, you have to choose. You can't be part of this conversation in the class on the terms you want to be part of it on, which is speaking from your own personal experience as it relates to what we're reading, unless you agree that I'm going to pass that information on to somebody else. Some people are fine with that, of course. Some people want to pass that information on. Typically, they usually already have by the time they get into my class. But some people are not there yet, but it's part of their learning. I think I could go on about how this plays out in the office hours too, what it's like to mentor a student, but I don't know that I really need to say more. When it comes to academic freedom, I see no way this policy does not encroach on it. There is a statement in the policy that it doesn't, but, you know, George Orwell could have written that too.
Thank you, Senator Fried. Senator Mitchell, you still had a question?
I just have a couple of informational questions. Maybe I have some other points too, but I wanted to get, if anybody can address these. I want to know what happens if we don't pass this policy or in any form, and the emergency one expires, then what happens? If anybody can tell me that, I would like to know, because that could affect my decision. Also, another thing that I didn't see in the policy is there's all the stuff about being required to report, but there's nothing about, did I miss it, about enforcement or consequences, you know, for responsible employees who do not report something if it's somehow found out another way. So if anybody could address those, I would like to hear it.
I think I can address what would happen if this body does not act. It's up to the president. It's up to the president of the university. It's in his hands. In short, he can choose to proceed as he sees best. Does anybody disagree with that assessment of it? It's my understanding of it. And I say that neither for or against the passage of this policy. That's my understanding of how it would stand. And then your second question was enforcement. Ms. Matella, can you address that? Sorry to keep putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. If you scroll down, well, actually, I don't know where we are. Maybe if you scroll up on the policy, there's a section called corrective action. And it talks about the different various possible corrective actions that could happen if you violate the policy. So obviously much more severe measures would be taken if you engaged in sexual harassment or race discrimination. But if you violate the policy, and being that you're a responsible employee and you fail to report, we may issue a letter of reprimand, which is a form of discipline. That wouldn't take away any of the rights that you would have under your respective CBAs to grieve that discipline. It also doesn't mean that we have to do that. That is something that could happen. And we put it out there so that everybody totally understands what are possible options. And let me know if you're having a hard time finding it. It might be section 10 or something like that. I'm not sure. 11? Right there. Responsible employees who fail to report as required may be subject to discipline, which may include a letter of reprimand or other appropriate corrective measures.
Senator Davis.
I have a hypothetical that I'd like to have addressed because I want to understand when all we would be required to report every time. And I appreciate Senator Fried's examples, concrete examples, but what if you have a situation where you have credible evidence and then the student tells you that it's already been reported, so you don't report, but it hasn't been reported? Would you be responsible? There's another one that's related, which is, do you have a responsibility to report it even if it has been reported already, just to make sure that it has really been reported, so that you end up with AAEO getting multiple reports over and over again of events that may have happened even years in the past, but have been revealed through credible evidence again subsequently. So I guess, under what conditions do you have to then report again? Thanks.
Ms. Mattelli, you want to take this one?
So I think the best case scenario is no matter if you think that it's already been reported, if you feel like it's credible evidence, that you would just report. I think over-reporting is, there's not a bad thing. I mean, the bottom line is that we're trying to make sure that students or employees who are impacted by prohibited discrimination are quickly connected with services that they need, and that to the extent that we need to move forward as an institution to stop sexual harassment or sexual violence, that we're able to do that quickly. So I would err on the side of reporting. I guess in terms of, and I don't know how this would play out, but I could also imagine, the other question there is you thought it was reported, so you didn't report, and later we find out it wasn't reported, and then someone reports you as violating the responsible employee reporting policy. I think we would probably consider sort of what happened, the underlying circumstances in terms of what that would mean, and probably just talk to you about your reporting obligations. But I would err on the side of if you have credible evidence of prohibited discrimination, just report it. And again, if it's a student that's subject to sexual violence or sexual harassment, you can talk to the Title IX coordinator or the Office of Crisis Intervention. And the point is that we want to connect those students quickly with counseling and academic accommodations if they're subjected to prohibited discrimination. So I would say pick up the phone and call Renee or Darcy, because they can get those folks the services that they need as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Mattello. Further discussion? Senator Peterson.
Well, this is kind of a follow-up, but I just would like to continue my own confusion a little more publicly because I've been reading many very passionate arguments for and against mandatory reporting, not the measure in total, but against that particular issue, mandatory reporting. And I've been listening for several sessions now, and I still have not seen how I could possibly be voting for or against mandatory voting with this measure. I can vote to pass this, or I can vote to not pass it. I am not in a position to vote for or against mandatory reporting because should this not pass, I have no reason to believe that mandatory reporting will vanish from this campus. I hear people saying they're currently in violation of the confusing policy and they wish to remain in violation of the current policy by not passing this one. That confuses me very much. I have had a modicum of mandatory reporting training. I find it confusing. I have no reason to believe that not passing this would mean the university would be in a position of not having mandatory reporting, but rather the only option we have would be to propose from the Senate, presumably work for a committee, an alternative proposal which excludes or highly modifies mandatory reporting and passing that. Could someone clarify to me how not passing this will actually be a vote against mandatory reporting at the University of Oregon? Unless you happen to have some statement from the current president that he's waiting for this to not pass and then he will make sure that the next emergency measure does not have mandatory reporting. That would be one type of argument.
Senator Bryan.
You're absolutely right, of course, but if you vote for this amendment, you're providing what democratic sanction we have available to us in the university community. You're providing sanction to the idea of mandatory reporting. Currently, it's a policy that was implemented by fiat, by a president, and if we don't vote for this, it'll again be a policy instituted by fiat. And if we want to not give it democratic sanction, we would vote against this. So that's the only choice you have, is not to provide a kind of democratic approval for a policy that you don't want.
Thank you. I'm going to go with Senator Espinoza first, then Carol, and then back to you,
At
Senator.
the risk of being a little redundant, I'm going to ask that question in a slightly different way. And I'm directing this to General Counsel. In your opinion, does a university have the option of not having a mandatory reporting policy?
Kevin Reed, Vice President, General Counsel. certainly this policy itself is not mandated by law as it is currently written, but no, clear guidance from the Office for Civil Rights is that we are to identify who on the campus is a responsible employee. The White House guidance tells us that responsible employee is identified as any individual who either has the actual authority or the perceived authority to address and redress complaints of unlawful discrimination, including sexual harassment. So we need to be able to define that in order to be in compliance with federal law. There are variations of how that can be defined, but it does need to be defined.
I guess I want to quickly add too, just on that if you sort of take a survey of the institutions out there and what they're doing in this forum, what we're doing is very common. I just pulled a couple this morning before this, and I was able to look at Arizona State, University of Arizona, UCLA, UC Boulder, University of Washington, PSU, OSU, U of O currently, all define faculty members to be responsible employees in this way.
I mean, I'll add to that, the statement read by Professor Fried from Ms. Tracy did laud the OSU policy or as being vastly improved, and OSU mandates every employee is a responsible employee required to report.
I have a couple that I promised to recognize, Senator Sabine and then Senator McIntyre, and then we'll go back to, I'm seeing a lot of placards, so we'll go back to for and against and call them as they come up. Ms. Sabine.
Thank you. I really just want to make 3 points. One is that when I took over the task force in 2014, it was a really different moment in the institution. And I think that part of what I find really frustrating is a viewpoint that sees the institution as monolithic, unchanging, incapable of doing anything better. And what I've seen over the last 18 months has really changed my mind about that. I think that we've made a huge number of improvements. I've been working closely with a wide range of people who are doing amazing things on the ground. And yet I feel like when we debate this policy, there's no recognition of that. There's no recognition that anything has changed. It's like, somehow time just stopped somewhere in 2014 or 2012. And I think it's important to recognize that. 2, as someone who's taught writing and has a very different perspective than Jennifer, I still go back to something I said much earlier on. My first job was teaching a course called The Personal Voice when I was a new graduate student. And what I got in assignments in The Personal Voice were stories about trauma. They were stories about children who'd been beaten with extension cords. They were stories of sexual violence, and I did not know what to do with those. I did not know how to respond to them. I wasn't trained to respond to them. Beyond saying to people, I'm really sorry about what happened, I had no way of providing the kind of support I think those students were asking for. And I would just say, my final point is that if you look at the OSU policy, the policy we put together does provide people with choices. It provides them with a wide range of confidential resources. This is one of the things that the task force commented on when we first took up mandatory reporting. The policy was confusing, and we wanted to make sure that people would know where they could go, because none of that is clear in the existing policy. This one does that. I said this at the last Senate meeting. We have an ombudsperson. We have grievance procedures. We have unions. Can we do better? Of course. Right? And we need to work to do better. But I think it's really important to acknowledge all those options that are available to people and not represent this as some kind of thought police, trying to crush people's choices and to make sure that we regulate every aspect of their lives, because I really don't think that was the spirit in which the committee worked, or that was a document that we put together. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator McIntyre.
I'm in support of this policy because it's a clear improvement on the chaos and confusion that we've had over the last couple of years. And I'm not at all convinced that my fellow faculty colleagues would know what to do with information if it was disclosed. And I feel much more confident having these discussions and really taking this to the floor and having a committee and a campus-wide discussion that really identifies areas of growth and areas where we need to improve. And I think this policy does take some initial big steps and improvements. I also think that we have an opportunity to revisit this. These issues won't go away. I think we're all committed to having a campus where students have options, they feel supported, faculty, staff, administrators feel like this is a place where they feel good to come to work, to learn, to be a student. And to me, it's not about academic freedom. It's about safety. It's about connecting people with resources. It's about clarifying our policy, providing education and training more than the 20 to 30 minutes, rubber stamp of approval. But because we're having these conversations and because we're so passionately committed to improving our climate, I think this policy helps us take a step closer to that goal. Is it perfect? No. Will it ever be perfect? Probably not during my tenure at the University of Oregon. But I feel that it's a great improvement, and I thank the committee for their work over the years.
Thank you, Senator McIntyre. So what I'm going to do, the last two comments have been in favor of the motion, and we're going to be coming up against time here shortly. I'd like to see, what I'm going to do is make a list of the people who are against and the people who are for, and alternate after we hear two against. I will alternate. I will give preference to people who have not spoken yet. So can I see the placards or hands of people who would like to speak against the motion? May I see the hands or placards of people who would like to speak for the motion? I believe all those who have spoken for, or that would raise their hand or their placards for, have spoken before. Those against, Senator Copeman has spoken before, Senator Balbuena, and we have a guest, Brenda Tracy, who I invited, indicated they wish to speak against. I will give precedence among those who haven't spoken yet to the senator and then the guest, Senator Balbuena. And remember, we're going to be doing two. Which one did you want to do, David?
If there's time, I have an informational question.
Okay, I'll get you next.
I would like to speak to the issue of academic freedom. I've done a lot of thinking about that. I listened to the students who spoke last time. And I remembered things that happened with me in the classroom and in the Honors College. As you might know, the Honors College is a smaller space. We have the opportunity to be in closer contact to students. We do provide much more one-on-one, assistance, and we have that presence. So we end up knowing much more and being closer to students in a certain way. Yes, I wouldn't say we are trained to respond to things like that, and I don't think the training that all the faculty had, mandatory training, is actually helpful at all. So, I don't know, but I think I remember, okay, so those who don't know, I teach literature. So I don't teach psychology, I don't work necessarily with, issues of trauma. But literature has the power to bring all those issues to us. When we discuss a text and we have thought, emotion, think we are faced to confront ourselves, the world, and everything else. And it's very powerful when you do it, and you do it right. So it's not uncommon to have students voicing things that happen to them, things that they think, and experiences they had. So when you discuss.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt for
deaths-
just a second. We're having 2 senators leave. We still have a quorum. Will we still have a quorum if these 2 senators leave? Senators, please raise your placards.
Don't leave now.
It was the necessary. I know I recognize the necessity of having to leave on a short. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanь you. Yes, we have. Sorry.
So I remember, and I see very clear differences between the time when I started here, somewhat while ago, and now. When I had in a discussion of, Madame Bovary, I did have people coming later and telling me about their lives and having very interesting discussion that continued in office hours and went on and on. I know that students trust or want to have that relationship with trust with us. And last term, I had a student who told me she could not talk to me because she knew I was a required reporter. And I knew something had happened because she missed class. And I asked, why did you miss class? And she said, something happened and I'm talking to my RA. And I said, I can't talk. I don't want to talk. So I see, and when I see silences and strange, awkward silences when we are discussing the Bible, which I teach, and as you know, is one of the best books to actually trigger all kinds of traumas and things in you with the amount of violence and sexual violence that there is. When I have students refraining from a full discussion, being awkward and having those silence in classes that are very small and they are geared toward that with 14, 15, 16 students, then I feel that there is a very strong influence on my teaching and on the my profession and on their learning. So I feel and I see that as something that infringes on my academic freedom. And I just wanted to speak to that. But overall, I agree we have gone forward and we have the chance to go forward, and we should. We should do this better. It can be better, and we should listen to more people. We should be listening to the constituencies. We should be listening to the minorities who are there, comprehended in this policy, but we know have not participated that much in the discussion. So that's what I would like to add.
Thank you, Senator Balbuena. We are up against the deadline. We can either call the question or a motion to extend deadline. A motion to extend from Senator Frye. Do I see a second? Second from Senator Psaki. This requires a 2/3 majority. What? Oh, amount of time. How long do you want to extend for? 15 minutes? It's her motion. 15 minutes? So make sure we get a good count on this. All in favor, raise your placards high. All against? By my math, the motion passes. The motion to extend will extend for another 15 minutes from this time, which will carry us to 5:13. All right? 5, 10, 15. No, 5:08. Yeah, right. Ms. Tracy. Can we get a mic from Ms. Tracy?
If it's okay, I'm going to stand up here because I'd like you guys to see me. A year and a half ago, I came forward with my personal story. I was drugged and gang raped by 4 football players in 1998. 2 of them were Oregon State University football players. I did come forward right away. I did report to police. I did report to the university. I did every single thing that I thought was required of me to seek justice for what had happened to me. Very quickly, within the next 2 weeks, actually, a backlash began. I received death threats. I lost friends and family. Many people turned on me. At the time, the DA said that I had a difficult case. I probably should not move forward. I reported to the school. They said that they would handle it. They would take care of it. They took it very seriously. And I trusted every single person that advised me at the time. And for the next 16 years, I struggled. And they call us survivors because, sorry, in a very literal sense, that is what we're doing. We are surviving. Not living, not thriving, but literally surviving what has happened to us. A year and a half ago, I decided to come forward again because I was tired of surviving. I wanted to live. I wanted to have peace. I wanted to have some sort of happiness in my life. When I came forward, an investigation was done, and I found out that the DA lied to me. All 4 men had confessed to what they had done to me. It was on tape. My rape kit was destroyed. It was thrown away 3 years before the statute of limitations was up. Was not even tested. The university gave my rapist 25 hours community service and a 1-game suspension from the football season. I cannot understand why any of this happened. The only reason I know of is because Reser Stadium was going to be built around that time. And it was a money and a reputation thing, which is what we see a lot today. My rape happened 17 years ago, but I am not the exception. I am the rule. I am the rule of what happens. I am not the only person who was discarded and ignored and pushed to the side because a stadium had to be built, or a university needed money, or didn't want to look bad. And what I need you to know is that there are some of us recently, over the last few years, who want to change this desperately. We don't want to be silent anymore. We want to be recognized. We want to tell our stories. We want things to change. Yeah, there's been a lot of books on the law, a lot of laws on the books for a long time, and none of them have worked. Nothing has really significantly changed since my rape in 1998. And as a survivor, I want things to change, so I speak out. I make a conscious choice every day to get up and feel embarrassed and ashamed to tell you what happened to me. And there's many like me. Mandatory reporting does not support us, it silences us. And we're tired of being silent. I appreciate the discussion about academic freedom and other things, but that is not what this is about. Mandatory reporting is about people, human beings, men and women, LGBTQ. This policy, there's a lot going on with it, and I'm only speaking about sexual assault, but mandatory reporting doesn't help me push this movement forward. It doesn't help me to garner more support from other survivors and band together with them to use our voice to change things. OSU has been amazing, and I know there's been comments about that OSU still has mandatory reporting, and they do. But the thing about OSU is that they recognize how important confidential advisors are, and they prop those up more so than the others. The driving force behind the campaign is not everybody's a mandatory reporter, it's we need to support survivors. And we have a law on the books that provides that we have to have confidential advisors on campus, because I was part of creating that law. If we could have made it so that we didn't have mandatory reporting at all, I can tell you that that would have happened, but that's not where we're at right now. But the university can do that. There's not anything wrong with having some mandatory reporters on the campus, but that can't be the majority. That needs to be the minority. The majority of people on this campus need to not be mandatory reporters. Survivors need to be able to go to whoever they trust and whoever they feel comfortable with and talk to them. And the only thing that should be said to them is, I believe you, I want to support you, and what would you like me to do? How can I help you? If the survivor is not ready to move forward, then don't force them to. When I was raped, my rapist took my dignity, they took my self-esteem, my self-respect, they took my power, my control, they took my faith in humanity. I knew these people, they were my friends. The only control I had was whether I went to the police and whether I reported to the university. Mandatory reporting takes away that little tiny bit of power and control that a victim has left. And it leaves us with nothing. I would urge you to vote no on this policy. Number one, because it sends a message that University of Oregon takes this issue seriously, and that you adopt this sunset policy or whatever you're going to do, but there needs to be a new policy. There needs to be something else. If you want to mandate something, then make it mandatory that every single employee on this campus knows what the rights are of survivors, knows where the resources are, and that they are mandated to give victims of discrimination, harassment, sexual violence this information so they know what their rights are, so they know where they can go. Empower them. Please empower our voices. Do not silence us. We can change what's going on in our country. I've seen it. I am one person. I have helped change 5 laws in Oregon. I will help to do more next year. OSU has done amazing things with me. We're not perfect, but we're moving in the right direction, and this university can do that also. And I thank you for being here. I thank you for having this discussion. I appreciate the committees. Another thing I would offer is if you don't have survivors at the table, then you don't have a real committee. And I'm just going to say that because no one knows what I've gone through unless you've been in my shoes. I don't know what it's like to be a person of color because I'm not a person of color. You can't speak to what I'm going through as a victim of rape if you have not been raped and you do not know what I've done. It's that whole walk a mile in another person's shoes. So I would urge you to engage people of color, engage victims of sexual assault in these committees, in these hearings, in these meetings, because the things you're not hearing are how we're surviving. This isn't about just changing an exam. This isn't just about getting a perpetrator off campus. This is about how am I going to live? How am I going to survive after this rape? I spent 16 years wanting to kill myself every single day. The only reason I didn't is because I have children. This is a human issue, and I need you to take it seriously. Lives are at stake, like literally lives are at stake. And I hope that you see me. I hope you hear my heart. I hope I'm not coming across as trying to be mean or angry. I'm just very passionate about this. And I feel the pain of every other survivor that does not feel confident enough to stand here in front of you and bare their heart and their soul to you. And I thank you for the time. Thank you for having me today. Thank you for listening to me. And I would hope that we can move forward having a good discussion about this and how we can make U of O a place where we can support survivors and change what's happening on this campus and do what's best for all involved. And I would be more than happy to be a part of any of those discussions if anybody wanted to reach out to me. But that's just an offer. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tracy. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the motion? The placard, please. I knew that. Senator Lusby. Oh, wait a second. I'm sorry. I was going from, Senator Lusby. Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. That was really powerful, and we all appreciate your bravery and courage today. On that note, I want to mention that this actually extends far, far, far beyond just academic freedom for students. It extends into our programs, and it extends into our personal lives every day. aside from my role as a resident assistant, I'm also a content editor of a student publication here, the Siren Feminist magazine, and my work is to directly handle and engage with writers who are regularly speaking about their traumas endured here. And as a survivor of sexual violence myself, I found myself occupying a really, really challenging position where people are making incredible, powerful art about their traumas on campus, and I have to make a position between my contractual obligations as a mandatory reporter and as someone completely devoted to feminist and queer-oriented empowerment for survivors when they choose to share those stories with not just me, but with our campus and local community. And it's no longer fair to be putting students in that position where they have to either choose to remove themselves from a certain leadership position or their own employment in order to let survivors express themselves. And that's really disgusting. We need to be moving focus onto training our employees, especially our student staff who probably engage with these survivors like most directly. We need to be making sure that they have the tools to help give survivors resources when they want them, not when we think they do. Because we are not the ones who get to make that choice. It's survivors. They know what's best for them, and they'll tell you when they're ready. And it is not up to us. At least it shouldn't be, but unfortunately, it is. So that's kind of my thought as a student, both employed by the university and one who is serving student programs. So thank you.
So that was in favor of the motion?
Right.
Okay, yes. Senator Copeman. No, I'm alternating again. No, 4 against, 4 against. I just had to do some catch up because we had 2 for, 2 against.
Okay.
Trying to be fair.
I'm still trying to catch my breath here. So I wanted to ask a question and make a comment. I think I'm gathered enough to ask the question, and then I'll see about the comment. The question is a follow-up on Senator Espinoza's question about federal guidance on required reporting that GCO responded to. And I understand there is some federal guidance for required reporting in Box A. The question I want to ask is, what about Box C and Box D? The question I have up there is, are there federal requirements for required reporting there coming from DE, OCR, or anywhere else?
There's no directive similar to the one that comes from the Office for Civil Rights with respect to Title IX reporting of sexual violence. I would say, though, that the university is under an affirmative obligation under Title VII to affirmatively investigate any evidence of discrimination against a member, an employee of the university, should it come to light to a member of the university community. So should a member of the university community become aware of, say, sexual harassment in which a faculty member was the survivor, was the recipient of the misconduct, and do nothing with that information, the university could find itself held liable for failing to respond to notice that was given to an individual who, in the circumstance I'm positing, has some authority to respond and react and resolve that issue. The law under Title VII and equal protection law concerning race discrimination is a little less stringent with respect to the requirement to do an affirmative investigation, but I can say that it would be the strong policy of the university not to ignore allegations of race discrimination if they were made in a way that individuals with the authority to act and respond to those allegations gets that information.
Just want to add one thing. This summer, after the really powerful conversations surrounding race that happened on a lot of campuses across this nation, there was a was it OCR letter released, or maybe it was a DOE letter released on Title VI and what that required. They did talk about the fact that it also required prompt and equitable responses to instances of race discrimination, just like it requires the same sort of response to instances of sex discrimination.
So I read that letter, and I found nothing in it that mandates required reporting in the same way that I have heard it claimed that the DOE OCR letter from April of 2011 mandates required reporting for
Senator
sexual
Copeland,
violence
before we
and
go
sexual
on,
harassment.
before we go on, before we start another back and forth here, we are up against a deadline.
Motion to extend.
I see a motion to
15
extend.
minutes.
I see a second from Senator Dreiling. All in favor, please. How long?
15.
A motion to extend for 15. Please raise your placards. Let's get a count. Mm-hmm. All against? I believe it looks like it passes. We have a motion to extend. Please continue.
So my point really is, though, is just that there are different federal guidelines for different aspects of this policy. And it's important that the Senate and the university be fully aware that the guidance is different in different cases, in different scenarios, in different kinds of relationships. Title VII, of course, only covers employment law. It does not cover students at all, as General Counsel knows. There are some Title VI guidelines that Ms. E just spoke to. Those guidelines are not nearly as stringent as the Title IX guidelines. And the Title IX guidelines have been interpreted differently on different campuses. The point I'm making about the difference in terms of the different laws we have is that while I agree that it's important to have an omnibus policy that collects everything together so students can see and faculty and employees can see what exactly is required, there is no reason to collect those different policies together in the same way and impose the same kinds of requirements on them. At least there is no legal requirement. And that's what the policy currently does. Now, if we as an institution want to decide that short of a legal requirement, there is some kind of moral or social or pragmatic requirement such that there needs to be required reporting for instances of credible evidence of racial discrimination, then the campus can decide that, but it's important that we decide that in full knowledge that there is not federal guidance dictating that in any way. Okay? That's important, that there's not the same kind of required reporting notification that we have, or information that we have in the Dear Colleague letter of April 2011. I've done a non-scientific survey of a number of campuses. Berkeley, Stanford, UW do not have required reporting requirements for Box C and Box D style stuff. That doesn't mean that other campuses don't have them. I'm sure there are some that do, but many don't. That's a decision we need to have. This has been a policy at UO for a while. It's the status quo. I think it's a bad status quo. Let me explain why it's a bad status quo. I want to speak to this because Jennifer Gomez was here last week. She shared with us some of her views and insights on this. She unfortunately could not be here this week. She's away on a research trip, and I think it's important that the kind of point she is making is part of the discussion, because we have a policy that is bringing other forms of discrimination onto the table. So in addition to all the problems we've been hearing about with Box A stuff, some of the problems with Box C and Box D stuff that Jennifer mentioned last week from my own perspective. And I just want to sort of pitch this based on my experience in the classroom. I'm sure others will have had similar experiences. But when we teach issues of racism and racial discrimination in our classrooms, many of us frequently have the experience that students of color will offer their own accounts of their experiences of discrimination. Some people have mentioned this already, including experiences of discrimination here at UO. This will sometimes happen in office hours. It will sometimes happen in class itself. Let me give you a hypothetical scenario, entirely hypothetical, so you can imagine what this might look like. So let's take my 400-level philosophy of race course. Let's say that I decide to spend a day discussing issues of racial discrimination on university campuses in light of current events. Now, inevitably, when this kind of material is covered in my class, some student, always a white male, okay, always a white student, always, always a male student, will raise their hand and say something like this. I don't really think we have racial discrimination here at the University of Oregon. I've never experienced it. I've never seen it. That's a thing of the past. That's what happened in the 60s. And therefore, and now you can imagine all the kinds of interesting inferences that get drawn in the class based on this supposed fact. Often enough, thankfully, there are minority students in the class who know full well what's going on. One of them will raise a hand and say, look, believe me, there is racial discrimination going on at UO, yeah, in the 60s, yeah, in the 90s, today. Let me share my experience, okay? That happens all the time when you teach this stuff. So what's the guidance of the policy in these cases? Basically this. White students get the privilege of saying things like, we don't have racial discrimination here on campus. By contrast, minority students, according to this policy, in moments like these will have to face a burdensome decision. Whether to raise their hand to dispute such claims with their own well-worn experience is worth the cost of having that experience reported to some administrative unit on campus. In other words, white students are going to have the freedom to openly maintain ignorance in classrooms, while minority students who know will have their corollary freedom burdened by the awareness that they will be reported to someone, to an administrative unit as someone who may need help. Now, what do we call the kinds of situations I've just described? How do we think about this? How do we conceptualize this? These aren't easy questions. This is why I teach courses on the philosophy of race, okay? Rather than go into this sort of theoretical thickets here, let's just go up to the very first page of the proposal, where in paragraph 2.a, you will read the following. There we go. Quoting the policy. Unintentional discrimination is a concept applicable only to situations where a policy, requirement, or regularized practice, although neutral on its face, can be shown to have disparately impacted members of a protected class. To put the point on what I'm saying, this policy imposes unintended, certainly unintended, but not negligible chilling effects that will have a disproportionate effect on students of color. Minority students will be given the official line that they have the freedom in the first place to share their experiences or not, but they will be well aware that they and only they, okay, not white students, only they can share their experiences at the cost of having those experiences reported without consent. White students who, by the definitions of this policy, rightly cannot be subject to racial discrimination because they are not members of a protected class. You cannot racially discriminate against me. I'm white, okay? Will not have the freedom. Those students will not have the freedom to choose whether to share their experiences. Sorry, they will have the freedom to choose whether to share their experiences. And more importantly, in choosing, they will never have to face the burden of having to decide whether sharing their experience is worth the cost of non-consensual reporting. I simply fail to see how this policy is not itself discriminatory by its own definition. I think this policy actually invites a lawsuit against the university. I'm not a lawyer. We have lawyers in the room. I just sometimes teach law. There's a lot to sort of weigh there. But to me, we need to further address these issues. We need to take them more seriously. I've only spoken to racial discrimination with respect to this policy. Every other form of discrimination in this policy, you're going to have the same problem. Gender identity, religion, class, etc. Since there are no federal guidelines mandating required reporting for the down below stuff in box C and D, to me it's very problematic to pack these into the policy, even if, as Ms. Metella points out, these have been part of UO policies for at least a decade. Okay? So for those reasons, as well as reasons that others have mentioned here that I think are actually more important than anything I've said, I can't support this policy as is. There are pragmatic questions of how the Senate wants to move forward, I don't know how to resolve those, but I can't support this without further research, without hearing from constituencies of color who need to be a part of this conversation, without more clarity on legal requirements, and without an evaluation of policies at comparable institutions that don't have required reporting for racial discrimination.
Thank you, Senator Copeman. Senator Dreiling.
Now that is a hard one to follow. I want to say, thank you, Senator Copeman. The amount of learning that's taking, I'm getting right now. I mean, I'm learning so much, not only about this policy, about the way in which these legal obligations that are federal legal obligations work on our campus as well as campuses elsewhere. I'm learning about how historical practices and policies here at the U of O have lots of taken for granted assumptions that we're now finally poking at and we're exposing issues and concerns with. All of this tells me, and I'm not going to belabor any other points around that since everybody's raised so much on that point already, but I do want to say what I think is, I hope, obvious is that the Senate has had too little time and too few resources to fully consider the whether or not the model that we currently have as practice here at U of O and this particular policy that's being proposed, whether or not this is indeed the best practice. And I think the request for a expiration, that is a sunset.
Excuse me for interrupting. We need to check a quorum count here. I think I see somebody leaving. Can we do a quorum check really quickly? Please raise your cards. Oh, we got it. We're good.
Okay, I'll wrap this up briefly. I just wanted to make a point, though, that I think is very relevant here to our discussion in moving forward. And it is this, that as we have weighed this policy, both historically, that's the policy that's been in play, as well as the proposed revision here, I think there's a couple things I've learned. And one is that there are reasons to subject mandatory reporting to the kind of criticism that I've heard today. I think these are very important debates we're having here in this body. I appreciate the expertise that's being brought to this question. And I also want to acknowledge that what I've seen in this policy, there are significant improvements from the status quo, from the policy that has been in effect and guided this campus for at least a decade. And I think those improvements are specifically and very importantly in specifying who are confidential employees and who can become exempt. That was not clear as far as I could tell in the previous policies. I also think that given that there's been too little time and too few resources for full review by the Senate, and I think that this is absolutely critical for the principle of shared governance, that the Senate, in order for us not to be rubber stamping policy, the practice and principle of shared governance relies on this body being informed at a high level about policies that are relevant to the academic matters of this institution. And it is also something that we should remember, we should not fear vigorous debate and vigorous disclosure over disagreements when it comes to policies that are being interrogated. So it's our duty and cherished right to review, deliberate, and advance academic policy. But this also means we've got to get into the weeds. We've got to study policy proposals. We've got to learn deeply about things that affect the governance of this institution. So this duty stems from our right, which is statutory. It's an obligation as well as a right that comes through that. But it also means we have to recognize procedural limitations. And those procedural limitations are in the Constitution and in the policy on university policies, which give us a 6-month window on emergency policies. And we could conceivably reject this policy. The body could decide to do this. And then what? Right? Then we're at the will of what the president does, or I think advance this policy as amended with the sunset, with the debates and I think clear concerns that have been raised in this body from the community, from students, from various constituencies of the Senate, and understand that the Senate, if the Senate wants full confidence that this policy reflects best practices and that it's the best policy that we can move forward, that means the Senate needs to lead by working with the CSGBV, I think I got that acronym right, and the President, as per our statutory right and obligation, and get really wonky, right? I mean, getting into this and really looking at comparatively what are the alternatives? What would work here? Is that discussion worth having? Is this the time to have it? Who needs to be involved in that conversation so that we really are moving forward, not just with saying no, but actually moving forward with something that makes the University of Oregon advance a policy that is the model of the nation. Not just what other universities are doing, but something that actually cuts a new edge in what is possible here across not only these 4 boxes, but what an institution could do, both to protect and honor the autonomy of and voice of survivors, but also advance those broad values around ending sexual harassment, discrimination, racial discrimination, and so forth. All of those things that I think we abhor. So with that, I want to, with the amendments that have been made, as well as with the sunset, I support this as it's moving forward, and I hope the rest of the Senate will as well.
The chair will entertain a motion to call the question. Senator Frazee, is there a second? Senator Peterson. This requires a 2/3 majority. Yes? Well, this is to just call the question. Yeah, I consider the roll call to be done. All in favor of calling the question, please raise your placards. Can we get a count on this?
Nine.
29. All against? 3. The motion to call the question is passed. We now move to voting on the main motion. The request has been made for a roll call vote. How would you like us to proceed on that, Kurt?
Our parliamentarian has said that what we do is simply read through the list of all the senators. They respond yes or no or pass, and then if we go through it and there are those who have passed, we go back through it again.
So you have the option to pass, and we will come back to you on a second time through. Please sing out loud and clear, yes, no, or pass when your name is called. Why don't you?
This is organized by school and college. So, CAS Natural Sciences. Sina? Jeff Sina?
No. I mean, he's not here.
John Connery? Yes. Dejing Du? Jennifer Fried? No. Wei Young Hei?
Hold on a moment. Yes.
I'm sorry. Thank you. You did tell me that, and I forgot.
Repeat the vote up to what we have
Randy
so far.
was doing it, but I will do that.
Either yes, no, absent, or pass.
So Connery was a yes. Fried was a no.
Okay.
Wei Young Hei? Ken Prohoda? Michael Price? No. That's a no for Price. Reja Ray? Reja Rajai? Sorry. Hans Dreyer? Yes. That's a yes for Dreyer. CAS Social Sciences, Jane Kramer? Michael Dreiling? Yes. Yes for Dreiling. Bill Harbaugh? Yes. Yes for Harbaugh. Craig Parsons? Peter Walker? CAS Humanities? Jane Averill. Yes for Averill. Colin Koopman. Pass. Geraldine Poisat Newcomb. No. No for Poisat Newcomb. Gina Saki. No for Saki. Donna Shaw. No for Shaw. Eric Peterson. Pedersen, I'm sorry. And that was a yes for Pedersen. Daniela Vallega now, who has a sub. Pedro Garcia Caro, not here. Architecture and Allied Arts, Jack Ryan. Laura Leet. Ron Lovinger. Yes. Lovinger is a yes. Rich Marjoram. Yes. Marjoram is a yes. College of Education, Deanna Linville. No. Linville is no. Laura Lee McIntyre. Deborah Olson. Journalism and Communication, Donna Merskin. School of Law, John Bonine. Library, Victoria Mitchell. Yes. Mitchell is yes. Edward Teague. No. Teague is no. College of Business, Robin Clement has a sub. Thank you. No for Clement. Jennifer Ellis. No. Ellis is no. School of Music and Dance, Alexandra Dawson. Edith Schneer. Honors College, Monique Balbuena. No for Balbuena. Other academic units, Edward Davis. Yes. Davis is yes. Officers of Administration, David Espinoza. Yes for Espinoza. Keith Frazee. Yes for Frazee. Stephanie McGee. Yes for McGee. Students, Andrew Dunn. Rachel Nicholson. No. Nicholson is no. Zach Lusby. No. Lusby is no. Nicole Hendricks. No. No for Hendricks. Zach Rentschler. No for Rentschler. Classified staff, John Allen. Theodora Coe Thompson. Jimmy Murray. Murray is yes. Career NTTF Research, Greg Bryant. No. Bryant is no. Academic Council Chair is Francis White. White is yes. Senate President Randy Sullivan. We had one pass. That was Colin Koopman. Koopman is no. That's it. I will add these up. Yeah, 15 yes. 16 no.
The motion fails. If I could request the senators, if there's no objection to extending, we need to get the academic, the curriculum report approved. Can folks stick around for just a few more minutes to do that? Can we get a quorum for that? Francis.
So moved.
The curriculum report has been moved and seconded. Well, doesn't need a second. Is there any discussion on the curriculum report? Anything we need to be aware of, Francis?
There are 146 courses this term.
I approve every single one of them. All in favor of approving the curriculum report, please raise your placards. Put them down. All against. The curriculum report is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your participation. We're going to roll that over. And we're also rolling over the academic continuity report. We'll do those brief. Nope. 15 to 16. 16 to 15. And even if I...
This is